Thanks very much to John and the team here at Gayfield for having us here tonight, but most importantly for having us here over the course of the week for what I think will be a fun and very interesting week of collaborations. It's very nice to be speaking to a small group of friends and family, so it's quite informal, which is nice. Tonight I'm just going to talk about our own practice, GRAS, and I'll give you a bit of background about our work, but then give you an introduction to the Maker Library Network and our experience of that. This slide was more relevant in Berlin because I had to say where we were from. But we're an Edinburgh-based practice. We actually started set up initially in Glasgow, and we brought a bit of the rough side of Glasgow, I think, to Edinburgh, and now based in Leith, and very much enjoying it here. We are principally an architectural practice, but we do get involved in all kinds of things from products to ideas. We've been developing some concepts for apps even and things like that on physical things. Exhibitions. We're very honoured to be involved in this project because this has always been a building that we've been aware of in Edinburgh. It's one of the more interesting post-industrial buildings, I suppose, that are left. There aren't too many, as John says, in Edinburgh. But at the centre of all of our work, we have the process of making, whether that be making ourselves or collaborating with the people who end up delivering our projects. To summarise our approach, GRAS exists to create extraordinary things and places through the exploration of ideas, materials, techniques and technologies. So we like to think of ourselves as a progressive practice. So why did we become architect makers? We didn't really know that we were architect makers until people started applying the label to us, and we quite liked it, so we're sort of starting to use it. Initially, it was out of necessity. This is our first office in Glasgow. Not a dissimilar space to this one in many ways. We had the opportunity of converting this space to form our own office, including a little shop on the ground floor and a gallery, and then our own workspace, which was down here. We had a very limited budget, so what we couldn't get the contractors to do, we then did ourselves. So after the contractor finished up at the end of the day, we'd put our overalls on and we'd carry on. And that was the only way we could get things done the way we wanted them to be. This is the same space that we worked in. We were there for 5 and a bit years before we moved through to Leith. And some other views of the new link down, bringing you down from a shop up on the top then to the space at the bottom. But again, yeah, it was really about us getting stuck in order to be able to deliver a project that otherwise wouldn't have been possible. Everyone knows as a student that you have no choice but to do the work yourself, because you're not going to pay anyone to do it, because you simply don't have a penny. This was an exhibition that we put on for our master's project, which was ultimately the reason that we set up practice. Stuart Falconer, at the time Stephen Orr and I. This was a project on a potential future for Cumbernauld. And here we learned all about wiring and electronics and setting up monitors and things that we had no experience of. This is us trying to work out another exhibition. Sometimes we ended up doing the things ourselves because we didn't know exactly what it was that we were doing, so we couldn't tell other people what we wanted. So we had to just kind of figure it out as we went along. This was us playing with projectors, trying to understand how we could apply. This was, I suppose, now 6, 7, maybe even 8 years ago. It's been done many times since, but try and apply an image onto a surface that people could then interact with. And so we built these cabinets. This was an exhibition of students' work, and we wanted to celebrate the work. In our minds, students' work was there for 5 minutes and was on show and everyone celebrated it and then it disappeared. We wanted to celebrate the work and give it some sense of permanence. So rather than putting it up on the walls as paper mounted on the walls, we wanted to encase it in these very heavy, solid archive boxes, so they felt like they were, they had some significance and some long-term importance. And here you can see the image being applied onto the top. Then people could use the mouse, and we built a website so that people could engage with the content and look at the different people's work, or they could slide out the work and look at the hard copies. Again, we had to literally do it ourselves because we had to work it out as we went along. This is a project in Edinburgh, working with Nick Groves-Raines, also an architect. He's my father. He's principally a practicing conservation architect, but he dabbles in other bits and pieces as well. This was a concept for a composting shed in a garden, which you can see if you take a walk along the Leith. The walk, if you peer through a fence, you pass the back of this building. You can see this guy here on the right. Here, he's walking along the public path. So it's in a private garden, but you can see it. So we had the beginning of an idea, but we didn't know exactly how to execute it. There were a team of people working on the landscaping, and they had a certain set of skills. And by collaborating with them, we were able to take an idea and develop the details and the principles of how we would apply that idea. Through working hand in hand with them, this thing grew out of the ground, eventually becoming a structure, and something ended up being something quite special. We could never have achieved this by drawing everything out, putting it out to tender and saying, okay, the cheapest person go and build that. This could only have been achieved through using the skills of that maker, because he had experience and knowledge that we simply didn't have. This is a project, it's a very small project, but one which probably encapsulates our approach, or the way we would like to approach our work best. In 2012, we were invited to represent Scotland at the Venice Biennale, and there was a very limited budget for us to go out there for a week. Principally, they were looking for something which was not necessarily physical, probably a documentary piece, maybe a few photos and a bit of writing. But we were determined that we wanted to make a physical impression in Venice. We were architects after all. Now on the left here you see an old Venetian wellhead. In Venice, if you walk around Venice now, in many of the public squares you'll see these old wellheads which are now covered up. These were once the only source of fresh drinking water throughout the city, for fear of the water supply being poisoned. They're amazing, intricate, varied structures, and they carry a very rich history. But while they were in use, they were a very important point of social interaction and networking. People would come to them several times a day to draw water, and they would exchange news and stories and gossip. So they had a very important social networking role. In, I think, the 60s, they started to pipe mains water into the houses, and they capped off these wells. And so it feels like progress, everyone's getting water in their own houses. Suddenly people don't have this social interaction around this piece of infrastructure. And we felt that this is happening all across our cities around the world. And we thought it was something that was worth reflecting on and considering, so that we can look back at the past and consider how we design for people, design shared facilities for people in the future. We couldn't take one of these wellheads and put it in a gallery, which is ultimately essentially what we wanted to do. So instead, we decided that we would build a gallery that we would take to them. So we knew that we had to design something that we could make ourselves, that we could fit in the back of a van that we'd borrowed, that we could then drive to Venice, that we could then get off the van and take by hand around the city, that we could then assemble in locations around the city in a very short time, because we couldn't afford to pay the permits for having a license to set this thing up. Something that we could repair on the go, and then something that ultimately we could dismantle and bring back with us. So we set about designing a lightweight stacking structure. You can see the full curved structure on the top right there. It was 12 interlocking panels, to form a complete enclosure, the idea being that they would block out the noise and the distractions of the surrounding city and frame these wellheads in a new gallery-like environment. Meanwhile, from the outside, they completely change the nature of the space that they're in as a very incongruous element. So they draw people towards them and into the space. So both locals and visitors could look at these artifacts in a fresh light. We worked with a local polystyrene manufacturer. He normally makes things like packaging for whiskey bottles and a bit of signage and maybe some formwork for concrete, but he'd never done anything like this before. So we had to literally sit in his office and look at what software he had and try and understand how we could achieve what we wanted. And the truth was, he was only using a fraction of what his software could do. And by working collaboratively with him, we were able to develop a whole load of new techniques that he'd never used before. Up on the top left of these images, you can see the cut panels that arrived at our office coming from Falkirk. We then hand-tooled these because we wanted to take the smoothness off the surface of the polystyrene, principally so we had a rough, hard-wearing outer surface that could take a bit of damage. But also we wanted to take it away from the feeling of being a polystyrene structure. We wanted people to look at it and not be quite sure what it was. We then blasted it with a paint stripping heat gun to give it a hard crust. And then we glued all the panels together and then stacked them all up, ready to go to Venice. It was only through doing this work ourselves that we could understand how we could potentially use the software, how we could use his machines, how we could use the polystyrene to do what we wanted to do. We couldn't have put it on a drawing and written a specification and told a builder to do it, even if we could have afforded to. So this is our van that we borrowed from our joiner. We covered it in branding and squeezed everything in the back. It only just fitted. Luckily, the day before we sent it to the guys to cut the pieces, we decided to scale the whole thing down by 5%, just in case. And thank God we did, because we would never have got it in the van otherwise. So we took it, we left Edinburgh on the top left. We took a trip on the ferry from Newcastle to Amsterdam, or Hull to Amsterdam. Anyway, not a trip you want to do on a Friday night. It was full of stag and hen do's. Then the next day in Köln, and then down to the Vitra Design Museum, where we currently have an exhibition at the moment, actually, which is running till October, if anyone happens to be there. We stayed with some family in Basel. And then we drove through the Alps, through a very long, hot tunnel, down to Lake Como, and eventually arriving in Venice, where we had to park the van and hire a local ferryman to take our panels as close to where we were setting up as we could. So from there on, it was all by foot. Sometimes we were able to carry the panels around by hand in packs of 3 or 4. Luckily enough, we were able to borrow a trolley, as you can see on the top left here, and we pushed them all around in a one. In each location, we identified one well where we had permission to set up, and we did a test run on the first day. But thereafter, we were really going out into the public domain and without any permissions. And we'd been warned by all sorts of people of terrible stories of the Biennale police who would shut us down and arrest us because they earned so much money from the Biennale, and we were cutting corners. So we set it up in the first location. We were confident that it worked, and then we went out and set it up in other squares. The quickest time we set it up, I think, was about 13 minutes to get the structure from the trolley to being a full setup structure, as you see it here in the middle. And as soon as it was up, as you see on the bottom left, people engaged with it and walked in to see what this was all about. Here you can see the full structure with the well in the center. Very simple structure, just designed to draw people towards it. We put a bit of signage on the front. Very importantly, we wrote temporary on the front so that nobody would get upset. So we called it the Galleria Temporanea, or Transient Gallery. We formed this passage to give people a moment of silence blocking out the sky and a very narrow passage before then welcoming them into this central exhibition space with a well at its heart and just a very simple little bit of text. Here you can see people coming up to touch it, trying to understand what it was. Most people seem to think it was concrete, which is great. It's the complete opposite from what it was. And this is really exactly what we wanted to achieve. Here was a child who'd played in this square probably every day. His father was sat in the pub next door, gave him a packet of crisps, and the kid went running around the square. And here you can see him looking at this well in a way that he possibly never has before. We were lucky enough to be able to set up at different times of the day in different locations, and we found all these amazing qualities of using a lightweight, low-cost material. It was translucent, and the form gave us all kinds of interesting effects. So through these projects, when compared with other more traditional projects which are procured via traditional routes, we found that where we bring the making process and the designing process closer together, we end up with a richer, better, probably cheaper end result. But where we go through the traditional process of drawing, building, writing a specification, putting it out to tender, there's always this disconnect between the design process and the making process. We don't have the benefit of learning from the people who are going to make the thing at the end. We don't have the benefit of exploring the potentials of the material or the technologies. So from now, having had this experience, we're now approaching all of our work trying to incorporate prototyping as early as we can, trying to bring in builders and contractors and joiners as early in the process as we can, where we can convince the clients to let us do that. As a result of this approach, we were approached by the British Council to become a member of the Maker Library Network. The Maker Library Network was set up launched in 2014, the beginning of 2014, after a year of discussion between a panel of architects and designers and makers. And it was led by Daniel Charney from a design practice called From Now On. The concept of the Maker Library Network is to encourage sharing, connecting, and collaborating between all members of the network. It was initially set up with funding from an organization, Connect ZA, which is a project funded by British Council South Africa. And British Council South Africa wanted to encourage collaboration between makers in the UK and makers in South Africa as part of a year of design in South Africa. The members, were initially half a dozen or so librarians. The idea is that each librarian manages the content of the space of the individual maker library. So initially there was one in Edinburgh, one in Glasgow, 2 in London, and then I think 3 in South Africa. There's always a maker element, so there's a space for the maker to work. Sometimes the maker and the librarian are the same person. And then there are also mentors, so there were very interesting, exciting mentors that were brought in by the British Council to work with the members on the network to share their experience of making. So they had this idea of a network of individual maker libraries, and each individual maker library had to consist of a library element where you had books which were focused on their particular speciality in terms of making. So if they specialized in electronics, they might have a library that was slightly more geared towards electronics. We are architects, so we have a library which is slightly more geared towards architecture. Then they have a make space, which is a physical space for making, which we at the time didn't have in our office. And they have a gallery space where you exhibit the work of other people, preferably other people on the network, but also bringing in other people who are not connected to the network. This is how the Maker Library Network looks now. So it is a growing network. So we've got individual maker libraries throughout the UK. There's a new one launched in Berlin just a couple of months ago, elegant embellishments. There are several in Cape Town and Johannesburg, and coming up soon there will be maker libraries in Nigeria, in Brazil and in Mexico, and also in Poland, I think. So this has gone from being a network which was initially designed to encourage collaboration between the UK and South Africa, and it's now becoming this global network. Now, when we were invited to become maker librarians, we didn't have a workshop space or a gallery space in our office. Our office was at the time simply an office. And we joked that we had this caravan. We joked that, well, why don't we stick it in the caravan and then, we can take it around. And immediately they latched onto that and thought that was a particularly interesting way of approaching this project. So very quickly we started to see how we could convert the caravan. It's a 1960s classic caravan which we've restored. So any alterations we wanted to be fully reversible. But we developed a system which had been designed by through the network, which was then given to each of the network members, which they could then adapt to create their own maker library space. We took those principles and we converted our caravan into a mobile workshop, gallery space, and library. The idea being that we could then take it to places, we could collaborate with people, we could work on things in different locations. This is us adapting the system, which was designed by Alan Merron, and then installed in the caravan. You can see this just next door now. These are some works which are on show here by Tim Taylor, Wasserturm, which were documented by Bescher and Bescher. He's painstakingly made, not all of them, but about 75 of them out of matchsticks, using the same meticulous approach that the Beschers took to their photographs. Again, these can be seen next door. And here's our meeting space. So we have had several meetings in there to discuss projects and collaborations with up to 7 or 8 people at a time. And it's quite a nice space for sitting and discussing projects. It's very intimate and very close. And as you'll see next door, we adapted the caravan to create an outdoor making space so that we could then do more messy work outside. Now, being a member of the Maker Library network encouraged us to bring a few things to the foreground, which we'd normally tend to just do in our own time and not really celebrate. And they're developing ideas of products or showcasing and collaborating with other makers. This is Vivek Magnuson, Icelandic architect maker. And we were very pleased to be able to show his work and bring it here and put it alongside other makers. And then to get more involved in making ourselves for the sake of making rather than as a byproduct of something else. This is a project that we did for a company in London. They were looking to develop a system for hanging planters. It's a very simple system. It's nothing groundbreaking, but it's a significant project for us because it's the first time we've been paid to make a physical product rather than a building. And here are their products that they're now selling in London. Then we're also able to develop some more explorative things. This is a little maquette made out of straw and thread. This is inspired by Himeli, which is an old Finnish technique for making Christmas decorations using real straw and thread. And they're typically very geometrical, symmetrical structures with very strict rules on how you do them. We decided to take the physical principles of the Himeli structures, which are that the straw works in compression and the thread running through the straw works in tension, and see if we could use that in a sort of Buckminster Fuller way to make larger, more abstract structures. We started with straws, but quickly scaled up to work in copper and also in scaffolding pole. We got a local scaffolder to give us a whole load of scaffolding for a week and tried to make big structures. The scaffolding was pretty difficult actually, but the copper worked quite well. So at this stage, this was very explorative. We were just testing the qualities of the material and testing the ideas to see what the outcome might be. It's all held together with one single continuous rope, which if you just pull tight, pulls the whole structure tight. And the quality of the copper and the rope, bringing it together on the junctions, we enjoyed very much. Again, just something very sculptural. But then we took those sculptural principles and tried to apply them to something which had a practical use. So we started then to explore the potential of making stools and tables and pieces of furniture from them, and found that they were remarkably strong and very simple to make. This is one which is on show at the Vitra Design Museum on the right at the moment. And then very excitingly, we were able to take our caravan out and see what other people were doing and encourage collaborations or facilitate collaborations between other designers and makers. This is a collaboration between a Scottish surfboard maker and a South African artist. We took the caravan out to J Surfboards and sat down with him and discussed the potential of a collaboration between him and an artist. The artist had recently moved back to South Africa and was rediscovering his country. Meanwhile, Jason was exploring the beginning of surfing in Scotland, and they started this dialogue between them. And we commissioned them to collaborate on a project where Jason, working with Jonathan, would produce a surfboard, and Jonathan would produce an artwork while he was in South Africa, which would then be applied to the surfboard. So Jason then went to work. There's a video next door which you can watch, and it was an incredible process to watch. It's very interesting for us as architects to see the way he worked and to consider other applications for the materials and the techniques. There's a beautiful set of photos taken here by Makeworks, who they have been documenting makers throughout Scotland and putting them all in an online catalogue so people can identify makers to work with. Meanwhile, in South Africa, the artist was exploring the west coast of South Africa and particularly looking at the natural elements and aloe vera and different cactuses and things, and he was working on paintings in the South African outback. And then the two items came together, again working with a silk printer in Edinburgh. So the surfboard shaper had previously sent all of his things to Germany to be printed, and through the network we were able to identify a printer locally, and he is now working with them. And they produced this rather beautiful board, which is unfortunately not here today. It's at the Vitra Design Museum. It'll be there until October, when I think, hopefully, it will be going to the Guggenheim. And then we were able to see other people like Ralph. Ralph was completely off the radar. He's not the kind of person you can Google or find the website for. He built his own wood turning machine, and he turns bowls in a shed in the back of his house. And we were able to take the caravan out and go and watch him and document the process and celebrate and showcase his work and make other people aware of him. And we commissioned him to make a little bowl, which turned out very nicely. Since then, the caravan has been to London Design Festival at Africa Utopia at the South Bank. It's been to 100% Design in London. It's been to London College of Fashion. It's been to Machines Room at Lime Wharf. And now we have the pleasure of having it here at Gayfield Creative Spaces. And all the while, wherever it goes, we have the pleasure of collaborating with people that we would never have had the opportunity to meet otherwise, I don't think. These are thinking, crazy bunch of guys from Cape Town who do amazing work. Heath Nash, he's an artist based in Cape Town. Machines Room in London, is an open access fabrication lab. MacLab in Glasgow, similarly, they use digital fabrication techniques, 3D printing, electronics, CNC milling, laser cutting, that sort of thing, and they allow members of the public to come in and use those facilities at very low cost and give them an education in terms of how to use the machines, and then allow them to get on with it to deliver their own projects. In London, Thinking, we're doing very accessible, approachable projects where members of the public, including children, could engage, and then they would work towards a more refined product at the end of it. But it was very interesting to see how different people work and how different people approach their ideas. They were making little spinners which blow in the wind, and obviously South Africa is a particularly, well, Cape Town especially, is a particularly windy city, and they were developing this concept for having spinners which would populate a whole set of Harris fencing around a site and just spin in the wind. And then they took the principles that had come out of the workshop working with the public and made a more sophisticated version which was 3D printed, which they're now printing in multiples. This is Heath Nash, an artist, but he had, after the visit to London College of Fashion, he decided he would have a go at making a shoe. So it's very interesting to see how other people can just jump from one thing to another and take their experience and apply it to an entirely different area. I believe he now has sponsorship from Puma, so he was hoping to prototype this shoe, which was an interesting idea of wrapping it around and tucking it back in on itself. And then the artist that I mentioned earlier, Tim Taylor. Tim Taylor trained as an architect and has worked with us on and off over the years. But we were delighted to be able to showcase his work. And many of the artists have said that the works that we've been showing are now their most exhibited pieces because they've been to all these different venues and exhibitions. And I think Tim is also going to be pretty happy to be going to the Guggenheim. And then another group in Glasgow, Panel, they were involved in the initial setup of the Maker Library Network, and we were delighted to be able to take a few of their pieces to London and show them off. And then this guy, he's a giraffe upstairs called China. He was made by, I gather, a homeless man in South Africa who strips copper wire out of electrical wire, and then he used the leftover material to make these animals. Very nice, and we were gifted this by the guys from Cape Town. So it's really the richest part of the process for us is the networking and the being able to engage with other people, see how other people work and be inspired by them to try different things. This is probably more than 7 people in a caravan. All the members of the network at that time all squeezed into the caravan. And we're now in touch with all of them, and I'm pleased to say we have genuinely friendly relations with all of them, and these are people that we would not have had the chance to meet were it not for this network. So it's really been of benefit to us, and I think that's me.
Gunnar, thank you very much. Listen, we've got a chance just to have a quick chat together, really, and if anyone's got any questions, to ask any questions. I've got a few and a couple of comments. Would anyone else like to start with a question or comment? Well, I'm going to then, while you have a think. First of all, it was just struck me that the archive boxes that you made for student work right back then, fantastic. We actually developed our website to honour as much as possible people who have been through Gayfield, and on our website we use a type of a system that looks just like the tops of the tabs that you've got there. So I feel we might have to work together again to create a physical example of our website, whereas you went from that to your website. Very nice. Archive.
I gather there were 6 boxes, and I think one went to each of the architecture schools around the country. So.
Great. I also want to mention that 3 of the things featured in Gunnar's talk are actually on our walks from Gayfield, which last around an hour, that we're going to guide every Sunday. This is, you saw the garden walks earlier. We have the walks by design, which we've hashtagged. So if you want to do them, then tweet about it, or Instagram, that's what our hashtag is. So we have designed, they're about 90 minutes, 1 hour to 90 minutes, and they go out east, south and west from here. The wonderful composting shed of that metal work is actually noted on our Gayfield Walks West, and it's point W2, which you can see described down there. We're celebrating the walkways that are former riverbanks or railways in Edinburgh. We're very lucky to have those resources, and so we pass that very one on our Wet Walk West. And what else did I want to mention? Yes, I thought the role of the Transient Gallery in Venice around wells, recreating a sense of space around the wells, was just a fantastic, very engaging project. But it did remind me that those places that used to be gathering points in Venice are replicated here. If we think of our public laundries, we call them steamies in Scotland. Just round the corner is a steamie, now in use by Edinburgh printmakers. And that was the local public laundry for Gayfield. And we've got all sorts of interesting people have dropped by saying, yes, I remember. So the women went to the steamie and the men went to the pub, 'twas ever thus. And then what did that lovely disciplinary mix that Heath Nash took advantage of, an artist becoming a designer. It's a very interesting tension, and I've witnessed it both positively and pejoratively, is that the word, where art and design sometimes come into tension, but mostly people are looking at creativity and making and process. Very interesting tying those things together. Very excited about this week coming up. I've already spotted a workshop I'm going to, these beautiful copper lamps that have been created by the Maker Library Network, and I just think I'm going to have to buy those books. I love those book holders, they're just fantastic. Kind of bedside book, I mean, it's perfect. A really lovely thing, so hopefully there's something in that for everyone. I wanted to mention one thing. It's not somber actually, it's a celebration, but it does involve someone who's not here. Last July, down here, just with some close friends, we dedicated Gayfield Creative Spaces to the memory of Valero Olimpio, who was a good friend of mine, an architect, builder and designer. Originally from Togo, she was brought up in Ghana, and we worked together on a project, a sustainable building project. This is one of the bricks that we designed using technology from Oroville in India. It's a transferable technology available all around the world, and it involves using red soil, the laterite you see in the Arizona desert or in Australia. It solidifies really well in the air in Africa with just 20% of cement, as opposed to the 100% of concrete that they import from southern Italy. Very sustainable for a country like Ghana. We had a wonderful time developing the project. Fortunately, Lero became unwell and died 8 years ago, and we dedicated this building, which I bought with Alero's advice, into the year 2000. I'd like to rededicate that to Alero's memory this evening, and in front of you all celebrate the fact that she was collaborative and above all a maker. And so thank you for letting me do that. Time now to have a little drink, mix and mingle, ask any other questions if you like. Is there anything burning before we just break up into a wee social group? No. Well, look, thank you very much for coming. I really enjoyed tonight, and I'm looking forward to the week to come. So once again, thank you very much to the team and Gunnar Groves-Raines.
Thank you very much.
Here.